Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. Let's talk about a very relevant issue that has catapulted itself back into the limelight with regards to our sport, and that is the issue of the rehydration clause. The reason it's front and center again is because there are two fights that are potentially being affected by this particular issue. First and foremost, you've got CONOR BENN and Chris Eubank Jr. They have essentially reached a stalemate, according to the Daily Star, because although they've agreed to make the fight happen at 156 pounds, Chris Eubank Jr. is also being expected to abide by a rehydration clause. Now, long-time subscribers know my opinion on this. A rehydration clause is a euphemism. It is essentially a way of saying this is a dehydration stipulation. You are not going to be allowed to enter the ring fully fit and healthy. So what we're saying here is that, yeah, CONOR Benn's taking a massive risk by going in there against a bigger man. But what that means is that CONOR Benn will be at his absolute best, whilst Chris Eubank Jr. will have to be weakened in order to make this fight more competitive. In which case, what is the point of actually watching? Aren't you interested in watching this fight so that you can know whether CONOR Benn is the better man, whether Chris Eubank Jr. is the better man? What is the point in seeing CONOR Benn beat Chris Eubank Jr. potentially because of the weight issue, and then for CONOR Benn to celebrate when deep down we'll all know, well, Chris Eubank was a shadow of himself? Now, this is just a potential. This is an example. From a sporting perspective, it's not desirable. From a health perspective, we know it's not desirable. I've touched upon this in the past, and we'll touch upon it again. I then saw a tweet from Jake Paul, and Jake Paul said CONOR Benn is dirty because he doesn't want Chris Eubank to have a massive size advantage on fight night. No, he just wants a fair and safe fight. Rahman can weigh in at any weight on fight night. 200 pounds at the weigh-in, that's the day before obviously, 214 pounds at noon on fight day, and any weight on fight night. Stop making excuses, Junior, hashtag double standards. I then tweeted to say rehydration clauses should be completely banned in boxing, and here's why. And I put up a video from the Amir Khan and Kell Brook preview where I predicted that Kell Brook should win the fight by stoppage. I said if Kell Brook is taken into the latter half of the fight, then you could end up seeing another case of a seemingly innocuous shot take him out. Otherwise, to me, Amir Khan looked completely washed. And after I'd explained this, I showed a scientific study, which I'm going to discuss again in this video, where it explains the reasons that this is so dangerous for a guy like Kell Brook. At this point, Pac-Man Joe, who you can find at Pac-Man Joe 11, he tweeted to say, spot on, mate, if the so-called smaller guy is worried about the bigger opponent having a size or weight advantage, they should be fighting at smaller weights. These rehydration clauses are dangerous. People have died boiling down in weight and they're not allowed to put it back on. And HASIM RAHMAN Jr. actually retweeted this, so clearly he was following the discussion. So the point is the relevant people are observing this discussion, they're aware of it. HASIM RAHMAN himself is concerned. But this is not a one-way debate, and what I want to do is draw your attention to some arguments that other people have made that contrast my argument, and then I want to explain why I still hold the position that I hold. First and foremost, I want to start off with D. And remember, on this channel, we like to explore psychology, philosophy, and history, and science. We look beyond just the sporting, and we like to explore the intellectual here. And I'm sure if you guys are subscribers, you enjoy that too. So there's no attacks here. I've gotten the permission of these guys to use their tweets and stuff like that. It's merely a public debate. And what D says, who you can find at DRP9618, he said maybe they should fight at a weight they're more comfortable at then. I'd say it's dangerous for someone to have a 10-pound weight advantage over his opponent. Eubank versus Benn is a prime example. Eubank can drain himself those extra 4 pounds in weigh-ins, but I'd expect Benn to be no heavier than 165 pounds on fight night, while Eubank will probably be around 175. Some guys fight at weights they don't need to cut much, while others cut a ton. Another example is Siletsky, who rehydrates to 168 to 172, while I've seen claims that Charlo rehydrates close to around 180 pounds. Now, I will get to that later on, to those points, but one thing I will say is that the difference in weight between, let's say you're right, and there's going to be a 10-pound weight difference between a guy who's a natural welterweight and a natural middleweight on fight night, even if it's more than 10 pounds, facing a bigger man is not as dangerous as what some of these guys are putting themselves through, scientifically speaking. This is a study from the National Library of Medicine. This is one of two that I'm going to mention here, and this is the one that was mentioned in the Brook Khan preview. It shows the effects of dehydration on brain volume, And it found that in subjects that lost between only 2.1% and 2.6% of their body mass due to water loss were at significantly increased chance of suffering a serious injury following a head trauma compared to somebody that didn't have that problem. You see, to give you an analogy, I want you to imagine two bottles of water. You know those two big, you know the plastic bottles, the 1.5 litre bottles? I want you to imagine that one of them is 3/4 of the way full and the other one is just 1/4 of the way full. And inside those plastic bottles, you drop a coin in each one. Now, the coin represents the brain, the water represents the spinal cerebral fluid, and the bottle itself represents the skull. In the one with the 3/4 amount of water, the more filled up bottle, if you shake that bottle, the coin is not going to clash off of that bottle as vigorously as the one with only 1/4 of the water inside it. So it provides a cushion, it provides protection for the brain. Well, you're talking about a sport here where head trauma is incessant. Someone's being punched in the head again and again and again throughout the course of the night. And every single time it happens, it's like a coin being rattled off of the inside of that bottle. And that, of course, can have a great effect on health. Another study published in the National Library of Medicine is the hydration equation, an update on water balance and cognitive performance. And this found that, again, a minimal level, just 1 to 2% of body water loss can actually affect and impact cognitive performance. So you're talking about the person's ability to think clearly. You're talking about a guy who is now no longer capable of performing to his maximum abilities, whether it's cognitively, physically, and indeed also in terms of the impact that he can take. The dangers of that is massive. We know a smaller guy can potentially beat a bigger guy. We see it all the time, right? We've seen Alexander Usyk do it. We see it constantly and consistently. But what we don't want is to say, right, you can be a bigger guy, but you're in potential danger here of going in and getting yourself hurt. Having said that, it's not just those who are basically for rehydration clauses that are against my specific argument. So I also want to turn you on to the argument of Dr. Pugilistic Observer, as he's called, at Uzbeki Takeover. You can find him on Twitter. He wrote a much longer tweet. We had a bit of a Twitter exchange, so I'm going to read you his main points. He said, regarding the natural structure, and he said this because I basically said, look, I don't see what the big deal is in terms of rehydration, being allowed to rehydrate. If your natural structure enables you to boil down, because after all, it is also a physical capability, just like stamina is. If your body enables you to boil down on that day before and then put that water back on for you to be able to perform effectively and healthily, then your natural bodily structure, your muscles and your bones can fit within that specific weight category. You're not a monstrous, huge man that should be 4 categories above, but you're managing to get down to a smaller weight category because your natural structure is able to fit into that. And he said, so regarding natural structure, I do not see that as synonymous with natural weight. If you require excess water over that limit to compete, then the first natural structure weight is essentially irrelevant. If somebody is unable to compete at that weight due to not being able to rehydrate, then that is not their responsibility for trying to campaign at a weight that is not true. And therefore, the onus of responsibility surely falls on them. Now, ideally and unrealistically, he concedes, I would like to see a sport whereby every fighter competes inside the ring within the limits of the weight class. That would mean no rehydration clause from weigh-ins. The fighters either fighting a few pounds below the limit, bulking up to meet the limit, or simply moving up in weight class. Obviously, for many reasons, this is unfeasible, as it would require an additional weight check directly prior to the fight, resulting in many fights being called off, or fighters that do try to game the system entering the ring drained, which goes back to what we were saying before about the danger of this. So he concedes that. But he goes on to say, but in my little theoretical boxing utopia, I believe this would be the safest and most legitimate system to hold. Now, with this boxing utopia, it would undoubtedly leave a space whereby cruiserweights would be forced to move up and compete against men outweighing them by 30 pounds naturally. My solution to this is something I have long been a proponent of, dropping the cruiserweight limit to 190 pounds and inserting a new division for 190 to 215 pounds. The idea of set hydration limits according to the percentage of the weight class, i.e. 8%, so that a flyweight could not come into the ring above 121 pounds or a light heavyweight above 189 pounds. Like I mentioned originally, this is what I see as the most realistic way something like this could be implemented. And of course, they could have tests conducted to discover whether a fighter is entering the ring debilitated by means of trying to dehydrate themselves or not. I'm not an expert on what these types of tests exactly are, but I am aware that they do exist and have heard of other sports utilizing them. And regarding what is and isn't a PED, it's a very thin line in my opinion. Surely anything that improves performance could be included as a PED. Illegal PED is a much more definable term though. That last comment was regarding me saying that water is not a PED, so you should be able to rehydrate. So let me just address some of these points. Now firstly, of course, water is not itself a drug. So it's not performance enhancing in terms of it being a drug. Now, do you need water to perform to your optimum? Well, yes, but it's only enhancing if you are not in optimal condition and you need it to be healthy. Then it enhances. But if you are already healthy and you consume too much water, that won't optimize performance. That will actually decrease your level of performance. So you need to drink as much water as your body needs. If you drink too much and you bloat, it actually harms you. Now, one of the reasons that is problematic when you're talking about a percentage that you're allowed to rehydrate to is that the average male body has anywhere between 50 and 65% of water, with the average being somewhere between 57% and 60%. Now that 3% is significant. Remember what we said before, even losing 1 to 2% body weight in water can reduce cognitive decision-making abilities. It can also affect your ability to be able to take damage and do so in a recoverable way. So these are significant percentage difference. So 8% for one particular guy could be very, very different than 8% for another particular guy, even if they're the same size and operate at the same weight. Additionally to that, it's really impossible to know what the optimum amount is for each individual, because that can also fluctuate according to the way you've been living your lifestyle, how your training went, how much salt you have been consuming of late. Your body changes, of course, as you age and so on and so forth. So let's say you're talking about one fighter who has, I don't know, a natural body weight at the time that they're competing, a natural bodily makeup of 57% water, and the other one at 61%. Losing 2% for each particular person could have grave differences in their ability to perform. You see, water is just like a fuel, essentially. It enables the body to work. It lubricates your joints. It carries oxygen around them. So when you are limiting the amount of water, you are thickening that blood. You are preventing oxygen from traveling around the body. So apart from all the things we've already spoken about in terms of impairment, you're also affecting stamina. Punch resistance, stamina, the ability to think quickly. From a sheer sporting perspective, this is not favorable. Now, additionally to that, if you're talking about changing the weight categories and making a new weight division, well, that can affect what it means for the sport historically. You're talking about changing one of the traditional weight categories in boxing, the light heavyweight, or the heavyweight division. You see, if you go up to 215 pounds, you're saying that the greats of the past, the George Foremans, the Muhammad Alis, Mike Tysons, these guys would get absolutely obliterated by the modern day heavyweights. They're just too small. They're not good enough. They wouldn't be able to compete with the bigger guys. That the only thing that matters really in boxing is size. But we know that's not true. Like I said, look at what Alexander Usyk is doing. And while D was saying earlier, and he's right too, that there are differences in some regards. There are some guys that are size guys. You do get a lot of fighters that will boil down to a particular weight category. Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez, Ryan Garcia, they're all massive lightweights. Lomachenko, Kambosos, they're not. But they have other advantages. When Teofimo Lopez began to tire as the fight went on, he'd hurt Kambosos in round 10. He couldn't take him out. Kambosos had a great chin. Then Teofimo Lopez slowed slightly. What happened? Kambosos put his foot on the gas. That extra stamina. So if Teofimo Lopez is going to choose to use physical advantages in terms of size and punching power and strength in order to boil down, well, then there are trade-offs to that. So as long as the guys are healthy, you will get the trade-offs in boxing. It's not a case of guys being too big usually, and as a result of that, nobody can deal with them, and they're just battering everybody at a particular weight category. Even in the heavyweights, you look at some of the guys that have caused Tyson Fury problems, they've been the lighter heavyweights. The guys like Cunningham, The guys like Varleen, Deontay Wilder's not particularly heavy. There's a lot of talk about him potentially being able to make cruiserweight. There's been sparring rumours that Michael Hunter and Jared Anderson gave him all that he could handle in sparring. It's not the big, strong, thick-set heavyweights, the heavy guys like Chisora and Dillian Whyte. He's been able to deal with them with relative ease. So just because someone's bigger and stronger, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win the fight. There are trade-offs. But what there are not trade-offs for is guys being ill, guys not being able to compete, essentially. Additionally to that, you also have other differences with regards to how much water you burn off while you're exercising. So do we limit how much a fighter can drink between rounds? And there is a condition which is quite common, in fact. It's not a serious condition, but it's called hyperhidrosis, which basically means hyper sweating. And for those of you that watch tennis, you'll know the tennis player David Nalbandian. Now, many tennis experts, including people like John McEnroe, feel that Nalbandian is arguably the best tennis player never to have won a slam. He suffered from this condition, and as a result of that, in extremely hot weather, he often faded in long 5-set matches. The point is, how can you tell somebody like Nalbandian, who sweats more profusely than another tennis player, not to drink a certain amount of water pre a match? Not to overload on the water pre a match, not to drink a certain amount of water mid-fight in between rounds. You see what I'm saying? So water and the weight that comes with it is not performance enhancing. It merely enables you to perform to the optimum of what you're currently able to perform at. Now, I will say this. In the amateur game, you do not really get size guys. And that is because they compete so consistently and so often that guys do not have the ability to put on lots of weight and then lose lots of weight in order to make a fight. So yes, you are performing in weight categories that are a lot more suited to your natural weight. Having said that, you've also had the likes of George Grove, who came out and said he likes to put on weight between fights because it actually kept him healthy. It would help him fight off things like the flu and colds because his body wasn't depleted of anything. And so the point I'm making here is that not every single athlete and not every fighter is suited to being in the gym and working hard 24/7. Yeah, of course, you're not all going to blow up like Kell Brook, which is another problem, by the way, when you talk about people out there walking around weight. You often hear people use the term, oh yeah, they walk around at this or that. Yeah, but walking around at a particular weight doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy or in great shape. You could be walking around in a manner that makes you obese, like Brook, like Ricky Hatton. That's not your natural weight just because you're naturally heavy. A lot of these fighters simply cannot, whether it's psychologically, emotionally, or physically, maintain that great level of shape consistently. Some of them do actually need to blow up a little bit, despite what the sort of prevailing common narrative is that if you put on weight between camps, you're unfit. Some fighters actually need that. Their body replenishes, they heal in certain ways. That's how they're designed. Not every fighter is designed the same way. And so as a result of that, for me, I just don't believe that what you rehydrate to is enough of an advantage to offset the dangers that come with allowing any form of a ban on rehydration clauses. Because, like we said, there will always be guys that try to push the boundaries, try to get away with certain things, that will get in the ring when they really shouldn't be in the ring. And that's when you're going to see people start to die. That's when you're going to see the impacts of serious injuries. Let me know what you think about this whole topic and debate. What do you think of Conor Benn and Chris Eubank? If the fight does not go ahead because Chris Eubank refuses to abide by a rehydration clause, who do you think will be in the right? Personally, I will believe that Chris Eubank Jr. is in the right. Others here will say, nope, it's unfair on Conor Benn. Same issue with Jake Paul and HASIM RAHMAN Jr. Let me know where you stand on all of this. Thanks for watching, everyone. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless. And please hit that like button, subscribe button, and notifications button.